Good morning. Continuing our journey in Hemshech Samach Vav. We're up to page 8. So to review where we're at, it's interesting how it's building up. So let me lay it out just in a structural fashion. The Rebbe Rasha began to discuss the purpose of existence and stated right at the outset that the purpose is to be draw down the highest levels of Ein Sof, what he called Sovev, the transcendent within the immanent. So there's the divine energy, the limited divine energy that travels through the kav, the laser beam thread of energy that creates existence. That's called Memaleh. And the goal is to draw into that Sovev from the transcendent divine energy of Ein Sof. What is called, that God desired to have a dira b'tachtenim, a dira for Atzmus Ein Sof in this lowest of worlds. You called it Yichud v'Kudsha B'Richa B'Shchinta. This was all at the bottom of page 4, top of page 5. He explained the chiddush in this, what is accomplished. Since pre-Tzimtzum you already had that energy, so two things are accomplished. One is that now it can be received by existence, because before the pre-Tzimtzum there is no existence, there's no recipients. Now there are kelim, and those kelim cannot receive all that energy, pre-Tzimtzum, not just the kav, but also pre-Tzimtzum. And furthermore, to generate even new energy that's even pre-Tzimtzum, meaning it was not even there in the pre-Tzimtzum state. So that's a real chiddush. That's what he stated. Then he brought other reasons, namely two reasons from the Eitz Chaim and the Zohar, that talk about why creation, why existence, in order to reveal the hidden faculties, abilities, capacities, the Gala Shlemus Kechesav of the divine. In the words of the Zohar, in order for him to be known. And he explained that you have to say that this explanation is not the ultimate explanation, and that's what we're in the middle of right now. It's going to be, we'll understand that for two reasons. The first reason, which we're in the middle of, is because God's Koach is like Poel, is not lacking anything. So he doesn't need to reveal his faculties. For whom? For himself? He's got complete. As soon as he has something in potential, it's like actual for him. Even though it's not actual for a creation, but there's no reason to create if that's the only reason. If there's another reason, namely to create a home for the divine in Tachtenim, so then this reason will also apply. So the Rebbe Rasha makes it clear this reason applies to Memaleh. Once you have Memaleh, you have a kav, you have an energy that enters into existence, there's a koach, there's a poel, because it's all commensurate to an existing entity. So God has, let's say, the power to create light, and then he creates lights. So from him, his point of view, he doesn't need it. But in Memaleh, that serves a function. But then he started making his way backwards, that this Memaleh, where the Eitz Chaim and the Zohar apply, is in that world, in the world where there's already divine energy, namely after the Tzimtzum. Even though you could argue that already before the Tzimtzum there is that concept because God envisions existence, which we'll talk about in a moment. But as he makes his way backwards, we come to realize Memaleh is the divine energy that's already been allocated for the art. The artist has allocated his resources for the art, which is creation. But if you work your way back, he explained that the Eibishter, it originates first in his desire, and there, as we explained on page 7, there the koach is like the poel, like we discussed. The potential doesn't lack anything. And he quoted from the Pardes that once God desires something, it's as if it happens. Even if it didn't happen. But from his point of view, there's nothing lacking. He doesn't have to go to another step. The human being's potential is not actual. And frankly, actual is much more critical than potential. Obviously, you can't have actual without potential, but if there's no actual, you don't have, like you call, there's no substance. Nothing has happened. Whereas Lamaila, you can't say that. Then he went even a step beyond that. What about before he arose to his desire? There, at least you can say, okay, he now desires and envisions existence. For him, Koach and Poel are like equal, because, let's put it this way, it's not lacking anything. We're talking about before the Tzimtzum, Atzilas, the Klolas, Shmoi, in the language of Pirkei Rabbi Elazar, name, the Esespheres Hagnuzis, all of these are the terms. So there, the Koach doesn't lack the Poel. Then he goes a step back, but you are before that. What about Lifnei Koidem Alei Saratzu, where you have divine energy, but you don't yet have envisioning or imagining existence. So there you could say maybe that's Koach without a Poel. He says, no, that too also has something very subtle. He says, there's Sfiras B'Koach, something Yesh B'chinas Poel. Like he says, Nelamim B'Koach Mitziyus Dak V'Nelam. Something subtly is already there, even though it's still not in any, you can't say he's envisioning any specifics like in the 10 hidden spheres, but something is there. And we discussed at length what that means, the Yichud Amiti, that the reign that dominates Lifnei Tzimtzum. But there's some Mitziyus Dak. And you have to, however, say, therefore, and that Koach that's there is like he says, Ein Shayach Koach B'lei Poel. That's all still on a level that we would call a Mitziyus Nimtza, an existing entity, God's infinite divine energy. It's not yet envisioning existence, but it's potentially, it's like the state before the artist has envisioned the art. He is an art, he has the capacity to envision art. So it's like the capacity to envision art, and yet it's not happened yet, and that is still a state of Mitziyus Nimtza. It's an existent state. However, it doesn't have any shape and form, and there it's all Koach and Poel are like equal. And then he added in the parentheses, and obviously that itself is not the ultimate state. It's not mukhrach. It's not like God must have that capacity. He wants that, which means there's a level before that. And that's what we go to the next. Now we enter, so we've gone through Memaleh Kalalman. You could say even Sovev Kalalman, though he didn't spell it out, but we're talking about a transcendent energy that pre-existence, but it's still an existent entity, meaning its existence on a divine level, not existence as we know it. And now we're talking about the next is non-existent altogether. Mitziyah is Bilti Mitziyus Nimtza. We're here, you don't talk about Koach and Poel. Like he says, if you really want to talk about true, he calls it a mitis inyan Koach levad, a Koach without a Poel, not because it's lacking, because it's completely beyond the structure and definition of a capacity even. You don't even call it a capacity. He says, yes, Leimer, this is a level where nothing exists. It's pure Atzmus. B'chinas Atzmish and b'chinas Mitziyus Nimtza. Chaz v'shalom. So there's nothing to talk about. In the levels that we discussed, as high as they are pre-Tzimtzum, meaning pre-existence, but they're still a Mitziyus. They're an existent entity. They exist on a divine level. Here, we're talking about Amitis Imotzu Shenimtza Bebilti Mitziyus Nimtza, V'sham Ein Shayach in HaPoel Chaz v'shalom. There's no Poel. There's altogether nothing. It's purely a non-existential existence, as we discussed. The only way to understand it is through extrapolate, through negating that it's unlike our type of existence. So this is now the highest level where everything originates from. So what you're seeing from this immediately, that the Eitz Chaim's reason to reveal the potential and the capacity, the Gal Shleimus Kachesov, not only is it not an Atzmus, it's not even in the levels of Lifnei Tzimtzum, because they don't lack anything. It's only once you have Memaleh Kalalman and you have an existent, for example, somebody wants to have a blessing from God. So the blessing may be there, but to bring it from Koach to Poel takes work, takes effort. So even though God is not lacking, but you could say existence reveals into the world of existence God's capacity. But as the higher you go, so first he went to the levels of Mitziyus Nimtza in the divine itself. So basically to Sum it up, it comes down to this. There's the divine within existence as we know it, the world that we know right now. That's post-Tzimtzum. There's divine existence, but pre-existence as we know it, meaning pre this world. When I say this world, I don't just mean this physical world, I mean the whole Seder Shtalshel, the whole cosmic order. In that itself, we have two levels, Aleis HaRatzon and Kedem Aleis HaRatzon. The Esosphere Sagnuzas, Atzilus the Klolos, is basically where God envisions existence, but it's still not in existence because the Tzimtzum didn't happen yet. And then there's a level before that where he envisions that he has the power to envision existence, but he didn't envision it yet. And as such, it's called Kedem Aleis HaRatzon, but you can still talk about Koach and Poel there, not because there's a Poel, an actual Poel, but because God's Koach is unlimited and doesn't lack anything. And now we're talking about a level that's prior to even divine existence. You can't even call it divine consciousness, even super consciousness, because it has no definition altogether. It's a Bilti Mitziyus Nimtza, as he's putting it, a non-existential existence, which means you cannot define it in any terms without any form of parameters, no definitions at all. You can't even call it no definition. The only way we can relate to it is by understanding what existence is and negating. It's like saying, is God wise? So the answer is, he's not wise. Because wisdom as we know it, yes, God cannot lack it, but you can't say he's wise like we're wise. So we say, Chakim b'lei b'chachmi yediyah. He's wise, but not with knowable or perceptible knowledge as we define knowledge. Like you say, Haloi yetzer ayin lo yabit, the one who created the eye cannot see. Of course God sees, but he doesn't see like we see. So the way we explain it properly, we say he does not see, meaning he sees, but not the way we see. And same thing here, his existence is completely unlike anything that we can relate to. We have examples for it, and I will explain them a little later. I don't want to go into it right now, or maybe I will. Maybe I'll give an example or two. But the point in this context is that there's this non-existential reality of Atzmus. There's existential reality of Elikus, Kedem Aleis HaRatzon, existential reality of Elikus, Aleis HaRatzon, and then there's the existential reality of Elikus in the Tzimtzum and post-Tzimtzum, what we would call Memaleh Kalam, and where there you could talk about Koach and Poel and revealing Koachis into potential, into actual capacity, into actual. Whereas Lifnei Tzimtzum, like he said, the potential does not lack the actual. Okay, that's where we're up to, and we're in the middle of this discussion now in the middle of the parentheses on top of page 8 of Bilti Mitziyus Nimtza. I hope this was helpful just to so-called like lay out the layers, the levels here. Okay. So I want to give an example before we read on, how you can apply this to ourselves. Is obviously a very limited example, sorely inadequate, because it's example from us, we're not God, but yet we were created in the divine image, and as such, from our flesh, from our lives, we can somewhat find examples to understand these levels that I just described. When you talk about a human personality, well, before I talk about human, let's talk scientifically. When you talk about existence as we know it, so I mentioned this a number of times, the world we see and we experience empirically is the outer surface. What we would call, you see water, you see fire, you see other elements, different species. This is things that are subject to our sensory tools: sight, sound, taste, touch, and smell. Then there are suprasensory things like love, ideas, things you cannot tangibly relate to, but still it's empirically proven through other tools that we have. As you go deeper and deeper, we come to realize, and I'll just use terms from physics, you realize that all elements in this world are made up of molecules, building blocks. Those molecules in turn are made up of atoms. Atoms in turn made up of subatomic particles. And then there's subatomic. And we still don't know how far you can go, but it's clearly really an endless journey. Now, nobody's ever seen subatomic particles or even subatomic or even atoms for that matter. But it's clearly proven through extrapolation. You see its effect. So even though you don't see the actual subatomic particle, but you could see the effect it has when you either speed it up or you heat it, or different ways. It's called either nuclear fission or fusion. And you see the enormous energy that it creates. So you have to say that energy is there somewhere. When a nuclear bomb goes off, God forbid, or atomic bomb, and such power, where does the power come from? So you recognize that deep inside, there is tremendous amount of energy, but it's so concentrated that you need tremendous force to so-called release it, unleash it. What do you see from that? That deep in the core, even of physical existence, lies things that we can't even imagine. Who knows what else lies behind that surface? Who says we even reached? How much of that potential have we reached? We have no idea. And there are many theorists about it and so on. And modern technology is really based on accessing those energies, just like electricity. But now we're talking about even stronger than that and even deeper than that. My point is that these different states can be compared to some of the things we're discussing here. But I want to bring it to the human level now, psychological level. As a human being, we know ourselves relatively well, or however you would define yourself. People who are close to you know you. But at the end of the day, much of who you are and your personality lies hidden. If you choose to express it, great. If you don't, liba lepuma legalia, there are things in our heart that we can't even express. And frankly, there are things we're not even aware of ourselves, let alone others. So what we call a conscious human being, there's the supraconscious, supraconscious. And here too, how far down the rabbit hole, how deep can we go? Now, when you really love someone and you're very close to them, what you're really saying is that our relationship is not just on a superficial, we'll call it Memaleh level, basically based on interactions and negotiations and conversations, but there's some deeper connection. And it could be a transcendent connection even, not always even articulated. People are really connected, whether it's parent and a child, or spouses, or people who love each other, brothers, siblings, and so on. That connection is far deeper than just the connection you have with a regular friend or just a business colleague or associate. So here too, how deep is your connection with someone else? How deep can they go? Can they connect with you? At the end of the day, is there a part of us that remains always alone? As much as people love you and you love others, how really deep can we connect? So this is where Chassidus uses the language Etzem and Giluyim. Giluyim is a relationship based on expression, based on some definitions, based on some form of interaction. Like we're having a conversation right now. It could be a deep conversation, but it's based on particular themes and discussions and so on. An Atzmus connection has very little to do, does not have to be expressed. You could have a father or a mother love a child and never say it. I mean, it would be good if they expressed it, obviously. But the love is there regardless, even if the person's not there, even if you're not interacting with them. You love someone, even if they're 1,000 miles away or 100,000 miles away. The Atzmis love is not defined by the experience, basically. Now, of course, you want to bridge both. You want to express the inexpressible. But Etzem is just there. It's a core entity. So how do you define an Etzem? Giluyim you could define. We had a good conversation. I did something for someone I care about. I was kind, generous. I was helpful. I mean, there's all ways to express how we express kindness, love, and so on. But how does Etzem express itself? The answer is it's not so simple. Sometimes it could be just a hug. You meet someone you love. After a while, you haven't seen them. You hug each other. You don't need words. Both understand, without any even stating it, what's going on, that we are connecting just because we see each other. That's that. So I want to give a few, try to express the inexpressible a bit using the language that he used here. Basically, it comes down to this. The more something is expressed, the more it's in the world of Giluyim. The less it's expressed, or the more Etzem it is, the less expression it has. That's the interesting paradox, which is why it's so hard to talk about Etzem, because words themselves are containers. Like I've pointed out many times, when you talk about something that's not very deep, something superficial, talk about the weather, talk about sports, talk about politics. You can talk and talk and talk, just turn on a talk radio, and you see how many podcasts, how many pundits, everyone's commenting. I'm not even getting into the level of commentary, whether it's worthwhile or not. But they talk and talk and talk. Someone says, talk about yourself. Tell me about your more intimate feelings and experiences. You'll find much less words, which seems odd. To talk about the deepest part of yourself, you'd think you'd have a lot to say. Talk about superficial things that are not even relevant and don't have any real impact in life. We could talk and talk. The answer is because words are containers. Kalim is the world of Memaleh kalam. Kalim have parameters. You could only fit that much into a keli. So, for example, you want to pour a gallon of wine into a quart, it's not going to work. It's going to spill over. The keli and the have to be commensurate to each other. So essentially, words are limited, so they can express limited ideas or feelings. If you want to express something more than those containers, you need a different language. That's why we have the language of metaphor, like poetry. If that's not adequate, we have the language of song. Sometimes a song will express something that words can never express. And sometimes that's also not enough. The deeper you go into the core, the etzem, the deeper you go, the less expression there is. Sometimes one oivei, one cry, one laugh can express more than volumes and volumes. Why is that? Because the energy is so intense that there's really no keli for it. Let's go back to the example I gave. Look how much power nuclear energy contains, atomic energy. Why is that not so? Why don't we have such power on a revealed level? It's only in places that are completely invisible to us that has such power. Because the more energy, the less container. The more container, the less energy. Same thing in our human expression. The deeper the experience, the less words you have. To the point that we talked earlier in the Maimer of Samach about Kol Delay Nishtama. Talked about the shofar. There's the sound of the shofar, the call of the sound, Psyche Hakol and Psyche Halev, a voice that can't even be expressed. The other sounds, not the tkiya, the long wail, express more. Some type silence expresses more than words. How does that make sense? Silence there's no gilui, because silence is expressing the intense power that's beyond expression. So silence can have more power than all the words. And the deeper you go, the more silent it gets. That doesn't make it less; it makes it more. But it just simply doesn't have a platform to express itself because it's just too intense. So let's now go talk about the highest level. So when you talk before the highest, let me just say this. So if we were to map out these levels in our personal lives, we'd say like this: Memaleh kalam is the experiences that are commensurate to those around us. We have conversations, teacher, student, friend, spouses, parents, children, even strange. Whatever the regular give and take and interactions that we have that can be defined. There's an there's a keli, and in each situation you measure according to the relationship you have, how much interaction there will be. That's like post-Tzimtzum experiences. Pre-Tzimtzum, you're now going deeper into the human psyche. I'm qualified. It's not really pre-Tzimtzum, to be honest. It's just an example relative to the post-Tzimtzum. Where now you're talking about more Sovev kalam, more transcendent experiences. These are they're not defined by expression of how the relationship works. They're defined more by a certain connection you have that it's not quite definable. And the deeper you go, the more intense it gets. So we'll talk about two levels, like he spoke about here. Aleisa Ratzon, Kedem Aleisa Ratzon. So you want to build a home? You want to build a family? There's the Memaleh Klalman level. What is that? You hire architects, contractors, you describe exactly what kind of home you have, and they build it. That is actualization, Koach and Poel, where you are building a relationship or building a structure or building a business. But then there's how you envisioned it. Before you actually hired anyone, before you went to build it, you in your mind internally said, this is the type of relationship I want to have. This is the type of spouse I want to find. This is the type of friend I'd like to have. That's like Alois Haratzin level, like the Esesphere Sagnuzis. It's not quite defined in any real way, but it's defined within you. You could share it with someone, but it's not a relationship yet. It's not been built yet. Now, in God's case, that koach is like a poel. In our case, it's not, because we're humans. That's the qualification. But let's now go a step beyond that. You haven't yet envisioned it, but you are a human being, and you're going to envision it. Like I mentioned, even a child has in their soul the capacity and the wish to build a family and home one day. You're just not conscious of it. Doesn't mean it doesn't exist. That would be like pre-koydem aleisa ratzon, pre-desire, pre-envisioning. And then there's the etzem itself, which I'm going to discuss now. What kind of examples can we give to describe the very essence of a person? So the example I often give, which is an interesting one, is if I were to ask you now, what is your left leg doing? So until I ask that question, you probably were not aware of your left leg. Even though it's there, and even though in a split second you know exactly what it's doing, whether it's resting, whether you're feeling anything or not feeling anything. Now, what difference is there before you're aware and after you're aware? The truth is there's no difference. It exists, but it's not necessarily defined that you have to feel it. As a matter of fact, if someone asked you, what does health feel like? What does it feel to be healthy? Or maybe better put, what does it feel like to be alive? Describe being alive. As soon as you start describing any sensation, you probably will need a doctor, because health and life is not supposed to feel like anything. If you feel a throbbing, you feel your heart pumping, you feel any pressure anywhere, any sensation you describe, like I said before, is an expression, is already means it's not an Atzmus experience. Life, like it says, Chai Noises Atzmei, is just life. Of course you could explain, I'm breathing, I'm thinking, my heart is beating, but I'm talking about the sensational part. So the truth is, it doesn't have to feel like something to be real. And Etzem does not need expression to exist. Expression needs expression to exist. If I don't say what I want to articulate, then it just remains in my thoughts. So if you think about it, it's really it's a non-existential type of experience, because it's not defined by anything that you could say, this is what defines it. It's just there. When God created you, you were born, you have a feeling that you exist. And your feeling that you exist is not the same as me. You know I exist because you see me, and you know that since I'm like you, I probably feel like you feel. But it's not like you feel me from within. In other words, basically you experience everything in existence from the outside in. The only thing you experience from within, from inside out, is yourself. That inside out is more of an atzmizdike experience. Now, how deep can you go? Well, you can think about it a lot, but you'll find that you're going to have very few words and very few examples of how you describe your etzem. So the reason one person can connect with another on that level is because we both have an etzem. So even if we don't articulate it, there's something that we sense that we are just connected, like etzem be'etzem is the expression. Atzmi ba'atzmi. What it says in Bereshis when it talks about Adam and Chava, that they come from one essence. So there's something that draws them to reconnect to that essence. They come from the same flesh, from the same reality. Or you have nafshi kshura b'nafshi. My soul is bound to yours. So you could talk about it a bit, but how do you really express it? Expression is on a lower level, not on the etzem level. If you were able to talk about the etzem, The only words we really have is this, Bilti Mitziyus Nimtza. Now, of course, with the big qualification, here we're talking about God. We are not a Mitziyus Bilti Mitziyus Nimtza. We were created, and we have a certain, you could say, a taste of it. Just like we have that concept of Mitziyusim Atzmus, something that was not created by something else. You feel that you are self-made. So the Alter Rebbe says in the Ger Sakeja Siman Chof, that where do we have that sense that even though we know we have parents, and we know every tree comes from a previous tree, and we come from previous generations, there's something about the Yesh that feels like Ein Lo Ila V'Siba. It doesn't have a cause, and that's driving it. Our minds tell us that we were created, but you don't feel it. You don't feel, hey, I'm 50 years old. 50 years ago, I didn't exist, or I'm closer to not being here in this world. When you're here, you just feel that you exist, and that's it, as if you're here forever. So the Alter Rebbe explains that comes from Atzmus, because Atzmus truly does not have a creator. Like I discussed yesterday, it's Mitziyusim Atzmusei. His reality dictates his reality. He exists because he exists, not because something put him there. And we have a sense of that. So again, there's only one God, but that God implanted in us some, we'll call it some perception, even intuition, that we can relate to these type of ideas. So even though Mitziyus Bilti Mitziyus Nimtza doesn't seem possible for us to fathom, because what does it mean exactly? And yet we can talk about it, because we can somewhat imagine it and find some examples by, again, through extrapolation, by negating. Just like we can't fully fathom how could be so much energy in one subatomic particle or in atoms. We can't fathom it, but we see that it's a reality. So we come to explain that there's a whole new reality there that's not measured by quantity, and it's not measured by any of the parameters and the tools and instruments that we use. Like the example I gave, I think, a few classes back about the fishermen. When you use a net of 5-inch spaces, you're never going to catch a fish of 5 inches, because the instrument is limited. So you need new instruments. And that's what Chassidus does. By talking about these levels, it expands our consciousness to be able to contain, be able to somewhat appreciate realities that are beyond the usual parameters. So when we talk about joy, we talk about transcendence, we talk about experiencing a consciousness that's beyond the regular consciousness, what we're really talking about is traveling into places that our usual tools don't access, but you can absolutely go there. And that's really what we talk about, going into a Shabbos, into a Yom Tov, into a Yom Kippur. Those are meant to be going into the higher states of consciousness. Now, how high you can go, that's of course the Aveda that we do here. So what I did now is mapped out a bit, just as a very loose and inadequate example, just to give us a bit of a taste of the difference in Giluyim after the Tzimtzum, Giluyim before the Tzimtzum, even the Helen before the Tzimtzum, but in a state of, it's still Mitziyus Nimtza, and then finally the Bilti Mitziyus Nimtza that we are middle of. And then I'm ready to continue teaching here inside on top of page 8. Now you can imagine why it's important to spell it all out, because you're dealing here with extremely, extremely high levels. You don't find this often in Chassidus talking all the way to this point. There are plenty of places, especially in the Rebbe Rashab's Chassidus, that he does address it, in some places even more extensively than here. Some of it is noted below in the footnotes, but it's still not that common. Most Maimorim don't go to this level. It usually talks on lower levels. But it's all part of one big picture, so I felt it important to just lay it out as much as possible. Okay. I know that was a big mouthful, and I hope it was helpful. Okay. So I'm going to read now, continue on page 8. I will stop since I did speak for a while if anybody wants to ask anything on what I've just said. But I think it's also going to help us read on and understand the next few lines. But any questions? Okay.
Can I ask a quick question?
I just offered. I said, any questions?
Yeah. No, I said that, for everybody in the class, if someone else wanted also to ask it.
Okay.
You mentioned before, there was the creation, and then a higher level than that is God had the will to make a creation, then you said there's even a higher level than that. He had the power to have the capacity to have a will to do a creation. But can that go on to infinity? Keep going to higher and higher levels.
So I described a few. I explained a few classes back that in the Hemshech Tzadik Daled of the Frierdiker Rebbe that we learned inside of a few years ago, as well as some other places in Ayin Beis and others, they break it down to more levels, but he doesn't break it down here, so I didn't go further. Here we went from pre-Ratzon, Kaidem Aleisa Ratzon. The next step he took here was into Atzmus. But yes, you could break it down into more levels. Okay?
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. If you listen to those classes that we taught in Tafresh Tzadik Dal, that's 1933, 1934, from the Frierdiker Rebbe, it's all recorded. We have it all saved. It's all online on YouTube. You could get a much more breakdown of the levels as he describes them there. I'll just say this. Generally in Chassidus, you will find 3 levels before the Tzimtzum, outside of Atzmus. One is Etzem Ha'Ohr, Ha'Ohr legalis la'atzmai, Etzem Ha'Ohr and Gili Ha'Ohr, and the Gili Ha'Ohr itself, the Ohr to himself, legalis la'atzmai, and Ohr legalis l'zulosei. So that's a 3rd level that he did not talk about here. He talked only about 2. Within those 2, it breaks down into 3. But then those 3 break down into further, just to add a little more spice here. Okay.
If I may, just I guess question/comment really briefly. I don't know if is David Pearl on this in class today. He asked a question about why God wanted to create the universe, and this goes to Mr. Rosenberg's question. He said that these explanations could go on ad infinitum. That's not quite true, because at some point you get to the notion of desire and tainug, and then it ends there. Because David Pearl was asking, is there any way other to explain why God created the universe? Once you start saying he had a desire to do so, is that it? And the answer, I think, according to Chassidus, is that's as far as we can understand. That's it. He had a desire that led to a will, and that led to creation. It's not infinite. You can't keep going back further and further. It ends with desire. I mean, it begins with desire.
Okay,
That's
and my response would be, we're middle of the subject. I would wait till we see the Rebbe Rashab, how he will spell it all out. So I don't want to comment at this point. It's fine to speculate, but I would wait a few more pages where the Rebbe Rashab is going to get back to the ultimate reason. Here he's still talking about that this is not the ultimate reason, Legala Shlemus Kechesa, but he's going to come back to this, especially in pages 10 and 11. So I would just wait. We'll discuss it more at length there. That's what I would do.
I wasn't trying to jump the gun, but I'm not sure you picked up on Mr. Rosenberg's comment. Does it just go on ad infinitum? It doesn't. You said there are some other
he
levels.
didn't ask whether the reasons go ad infinitum. He asked if the levels of Kaidem Aleisa Ratzon go on and on. That's what I understood the question, just for the record. But he didn't talk about the reasons. So the answer would be, the answer, frankly, would be it does. But I said I'd rather wait till we get through this whole thing, and then we'll talk about it.
Okay, no, that's fine. I just didn't want there to be confusion on that. It's pretty important.
Okay. Fine. So now I'm going to start from line 3. Well, I'll go over line 1 and 2 again. So he's talking about the Atzmus, She'einu B'chinas Mitziyus Nimtza. And if you're following the text and want to follow it inside, go to samachvav.com or our WhatsApp group where you can find this text. The reality, the true existence, literally, amitis himotze means existence. The true existence is an existence that is a non-existential existence, which I explained and I'm going to go over now again. The sham, there you're talking about a state, and I didn't want to use the word state, but let's just use that for just to be able to express ourselves. It's a state in a shaykh in a poel chas v'shalom. And it's interesting, he adds chas v'shalom. There's no poel altogether. Because you're talking about something that has nothing in common with what we call existence. Till now, you're saying, God, we have koach, and our koach is limited, meaning our potential, our capacity needs to be actualized. God's koach is different. When he has power, his power doesn't lack the actualization element. Something like what it says, Diburish al Kodesh Baruch Hu Choshev Maisa. When God speaks, he creates with his words. When we speak, we don't create with our words. But there's something in common. We're both speaking. God did speak. Asara Mamoris Nivrelim, but that's Memaleh Kalam. Here, we're talking about a level of koach. So God's koach is unlike ours, but you still call it a koach. It's koach HaKadosh Baruch Hu. You'll say, I have finite power. God has infinite power. I don't just mean that in a quantitative way, but also qualitative. I have a capacity to do something, but then I have to actualize it. God's capacity is like actual. It's not lacking. But now we're talking about Bilti Mitziyus Nimtza. Here we don't talk about any type of poel, chas v'shalom. Why is there chas v'shalom? Because there's no definition there. Poel is already a definition, whether it's divine poel or human poel. It's already some form of poula. Whether God creates through his koach or through dibur, it's still something that you talk about that has substance. And for that matter, it's also not shaykh to say koach, because it goes hand in hand. So koach and poel, even though by us the poel is not the level of koach, like he said, we discussed earlier, but it's still, they're in the same domain, potential, actual, capacity, fulfillment, etc. By Hashem, as I said, they are equal, or one is not lacking the other, I should say. Ein koach chaser poel. But here we're talking about a level, there's no poel, there's no koach gamkein. Dima yes. So now he's going to say, 1 second. You're saying it's not a koach, but everything comes from Atzmus. So of course, everything, that's the power that creates everything. So he's going to explain that the idea that something comes from something else, something has an origin, doesn't necessarily mean that the origin is a koach and a poel. Like for example, when you say, I have the power to write a book. Okay, so my capacity to write a book and the writing of the book are obviously requires a big leap and a lot of work, but they are definitely in the same realm. If I didn't have the power to do so, if I didn't have the power to throw a stone, I couldn't throw the stone. But when you talk about Atzmus, he's going to say it's not what we call koach and poel. It's not capacity and then actualization, because that would still create some type of commonality. So for example, when we talk about, I'll just give an example from a different place in Chassidus, we learned about this. Can we call Hashem, even though Chassidus gives an example for Ohr Ein Sof from the light of the sun, and the sun would be the source of that light. So Chassidus says that's an example. Just like the light of the sun does not affect the sun, the light of Ein Sof does not affect Ein Sof, does not affect the source. But Chassidus right away qualifies and says, but there's a difference. The sun is a luminary. The sun's role is to shine light. Yes, the light is not commensurate with the sun in the sense that this is a source and this is just a reflection. But the sun is basically a ma'or. Like the Torah says, Shnei ma'eres agdelim, 2 luminaries. Atzmus you can't call a luminary. Light comes from him, but he's not created. Well, you can't even say he's created, but his personality is not to give off light. That's why Chassidus uses the expression, Lo zeh ikar elikus, shenesava memena ohr. That's not the primary thing of elikus, to give off light, like we described. An artist can be an artist, but it doesn't mean being an artist defines him. It's one of his abilities. So he's now going to explain how things originate from Atzmus, but you can't call Atzmus an originator, if that works. You can't call him something that I am the source of that. Where a parent is the parent of the child. So you could say everybody's God's children, but you can't call God a parent and define him as such. So he says like this. The ima is the b'chinas atzmis nesa hakel. even though the fact is that the begin of Atzmus, interesting, he keeps using the word Atzmus, not Atzmus, but Atzmus. Nesa Kel means he carries everything. Obviously, all the levels we talked about, Erein Sof, Lifnei Alesa, Kodim Alesa Rotzen, Alesa Rotzen, everything, it all comes from somewhere, from the Atzmus. So the Atzmus is Nesa HaKel. This is a very interesting expression. If you've not seen it before, or even if you have, let me just explain. Nesa HaKel is different than saying Koilel HaKel. When you say, for example, the Ein B'chlal Elamasha B'prat, there's a klal and there's a prat. Like, for example, in the Lamates Melachas, the 39 different types of work we're not supposed to do on Shabbos. So we know there's Oves Melachis and there's Tuldes. There's what's called fathers and children, meaning general categories and subcategories. So a subcategory is a detail in the larger category, called a klal and a prat. So the klal, klal would be, let's say, a minyan, has 10 people. 10 people is made up of 10 individuals. They come together, now you have a klal. You have a new reality called a minyan. And there's certain things you can do with a minyan you can't do, an individual can't do in davening, kedusha, and so on. So, but there, the details, the klal is made up of the details. When you say Neisa HaKoil, you're saying it's not that the source is made up of the details or even includes the details, he carries them. Neisa is a very interesting word used in Chassidus and also in Chkira. The Rambam uses it, I think Rab Saadia Gaon uses it. Neisa means, it literally means to carry. But what it really means is that it encompasses the capacity for it. But you don't say it's made of it. It's not like, it's like, a tree has many seeds. The seeds are all included in the tree. The tree sheds the seeds, and those seeds can grow into other trees. You don't call it, that you would not say Neisa HaKoil. When you say Neisa, it means it has the capacity to do it all. Even the word capacity, I'm being careful with because I used that before on Koach, and we don't want to use the word Koach. So we call Neisa HaKoil, and HaKoil means everything. So he says, so even though Atzmus is Neisa HaKoil, Ein Zeh Shehu Neisa B'Koach Chas v'Shalom. This doesn't mean he carries it like a faculty or like a potential, or even like a capacity. When I have a koach, I have the koach, for example, to do many things with my hands. I have the koach haseichel, which means the power to conceive of many ideas and contemplate on many things. There's a koach haseichel that has maybe, I don't know, infinite would not be the right word, but it has many, a lot of potential. Here, you can't call it that it's neisa b'koach as if it's a power. You don't call it the koach ha'atzmus. You call it neisa ha'koil. Atzmus has that capacity for everything. Why can't you call it koach? Because the imkain hariyesh is Mitziyus chas v'shalom. So then we're back to Mitziyus Nimtza. It's not a Bilti Mitziyus Nimtza. As soon as you say koach, even though it may not be Poel, meaning an actualization, but the koach hariyah, the power to see, is a Mitziyus. It's just not a Mitziyus shel Poel, it's a Mitziyus of koach. So, and since we're talking about Bilti Mitziyus Nimtza in Atzmus, you can't even call it koach like he said before, not Poel and not koach. Ki'im ma sha'atzmus machayev hakol. He's explaining it further. It means that Atzmus compels everything. Everything possible comes from Atzmus. Machayev hakol can be translated several ways, two ways. You could say that everything, it compels everything, but he doesn't mean to say that everything in existence is everything that is in Atzmus. Atzmus definitely has things that we don't even know about. But Machayev HaKol means that everything is source, it must come from Atzmus. So if you see anything in existence, it has to come from a source, and this source is Atzmus. V'hu inyan, and that's the inyan this is the language of the Rambam, shema mitis himotzei, right in the beginning of Hilchos Yisei Da'atera, from the true reality, nimtzu kol ha-mitzayim, emerged, or were derived all existence. So that means Atzmus Machayev HaKol. Anything that exists coming from Atzmus. So you don't say Atzmus contains it all, or even in a b'koach or in a potential state, but he's mechayev hakol because he has the capacity to do anything. Umushum zeh. Okay, 1 second. Now he's going to go back to the first line on the page, where he said, if you want to talk about koach, meaning a true koach that's not connected to Poel, but not koach as a mitziyus of koach. We're talking here koach as neisa koel. So now he's going back. That's why we say, as he said on the top, the vamitis inyan koach levad, the last words on the last page on the top of this page. That's why we say koach, even though he just said it's not koach, because he doesn't mean koach as a faculty or as a potential. That's what we mean. Only that which he's mechayev hakoel. That's why he's the koach, because you cannot say. Basically, it's like what I said before. You can't say God is the source of it, but you can't say he's not the source. So you say he's not the source, so to speak, because he's mechayev hakoel. But you can't apply there the concept of an existing koach, that there's an actual power and there's an actual. And then there's one more line, which I'll explain in a minute, but I want to stop if there are any questions before I finish the parentheses. The parentheses ends on this line, but I don't want to read the next line until we go over it. Any questions on what we just learned?
I have a question. I'm struggling trying to understand exactly, more clearly, the difference between Noisei Hakel and Mechayev Hakel. Could we perhaps loosely define it as meaning including everything?
You could say including, or the word I don't like including, personally I would say encompassing everything, because you don't want to create the impression that it's like this, let's call it infinite chest of treasures that has everything in it, because then you're still applying so-called the structure of existence within it. You have to create some quantum leap between the source and everything that comes from it. In other words, you probably may have learned the idea in Chassidus and other places. He talks about helem sheyeshn b'mitzias, helem she'ena b'mitzias. I'll explain. For example, if I open up my closet, okay, I take out a jacket. Before I opened the closet, the jacket was there, but I just didn't access it yet. So that's a helem sheyeshn b'mitzias. That's like it's in the closet, it's within the closet, but I didn't access it. Then there's a helem she'ena b'mitzias. An example for that would be a spark within a flintstone. You open up a flintstone, you're not going to find sparks. Not like the closet. So where's the spark? So you have to say that a flintstone has the capacity to release a spark if you strike it. You have to strike it hard. So you call it a helem, but it's not b'mitzias, because it's not existent yet. Even though it's going to come from the flintstone, it's not going to come from some other object. Now, obviously, with Noisei Hakel, it's even deeper than that. You can't even compare it to a flintstone, obviously. So I'm trying to find the right words. Can you use what you're saying? I'd say partially yes, but you probably need more language to really qualify everything, because you want to say everything originates, but it is not the originator, so to speak. In other words, it's like saying God is nature, but nature is not God. Wisdom comes from God, but God is not wisdom and does not even have wisdom in his mind. He doesn't even have a mind for that matter. So that's why I'm being a little.
No, I like the word encompass better.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I would even say further, encompass the capacity for everything. That's probably what I would say if I had to limit it to just a few words.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, table is open for questions now.
So in today's Tanya it talks about the avodas tefillah, but then when you go daven, you realize after learning this that you're really just appealing to Hashem on a very low level, like Yetzias Mitzrayim and like all the things that Hashem did in the Olam Asiyah. And so how do you make peace with that, with the realization that you're not really appealing to Hashem on the highest level.
Who said that?
Because you're just appealing to Olam Asiyah, the Kriyas Yamsuf.
Where did you get those language from? Where did we read, or where did you see anywhere it says that we
Before
appeal
Seder
only to Olam
Shalom.
Asiyah? Huh?
Because what we're saying in davening is Hallelujah and all those things that Hashem created the world. This is all after all the levels that we're discussing in this class.
That we're referring to God's creation. That's the part of davening where you're talking about God within His creation. But you've probably heard the expression that when we daven, it's called, the pasuk says, "B'chol karenu elov." To all those called to Him, and the Sifri, Kabbalah and Chassidus cites, elov v'lo l'midesov. You're speaking directly to God, not to His attributes, and not to Seder Ishtalshelus. We don't pray to the spheres, we pray to God. But for us to be able to relate, we use these are like channels. These are like a ladder. So we need language so we can relate to. So we use language like saying, "Thank you, God, for giving me health. Thank you, God, for giving me parnasa, livelihood, or food." That's our way of relating to it. But ultimately, it all originates in the highest levels. This is a whole discussion in Samach Vav. Later we'll discuss it. There's a whole Sherish Mitzvah Tefillah from the Samach Tzedek where he literally directly asks this question. So this I would just refer you to. A lot of Chassidus talks about this elsewhere. But don't take any impression from what we're learning here that we can't daven. Remember, Hashem could choose for us to access Him. Here we're learning about it. So just because God is beyond us does not mean we cannot. He didn't give us the ability to access Him.
No, we're just accessing. It just feels like a letdown. We're accessing God on the lowest level.
Anyway, I feel the exact opposite. When you learn about what Atzmus, now you realize that when you're davening, you're actually speaking to the highest levels.
Okay, thank you.
I'll just read the final line of the parentheses, which may throw everybody for a loop, but it's important. It says, "V'yesh lemer," says the Rebbe Rashab, "the bedugma kazeis who gam came b'chinas Etzem Ha'Ohr." So we'll discuss this more at length in the next class, but I'll just say this. Because God wanted us to have some taste and experience, even of Atzmus, so He, in a sense, transmitted, in some way embedded, this part of His, quote unquote, lack of a better word, personality, the Bilti Mitziyus Nimtza part. That's not even a level of Koach, into Ohr. So not Ohr doesn't have it on its own, as later in Samach Vav we're going to learn at length, but because Ohr is so bottled to Atzmus, so it becomes like a shliach, shaladam kamoise. It carries even the Koach Atzmus of Bilti Mitziyus Nimtza. So the Rebbe Rashab is adding a critical point, which may also help the last question, that Eibishter did embed in some way His reality, Amiti Simotze, into the Etzem Ha'Ohr, which is a Mitziyus Nimtza. So in other words, in the Mitziyus Nimtza of Ohr, you'll find an element of Bilti Mitziyus Nimtza, which is why we can talk about it, and why we can some way even try to explain it, even if we don't fully get it. That's what he's adding in this last one line, which like dramatically changes the whole picture, obviously. Because till there, you could say, hey, okay, you're telling us Atzmus, and it's exclusive, and it is exclusive to Atzmus. But the fact that this now, in some ways, transferred to Etzem Ha'Ohr means that in Mitziyus Nimtza of our reality, there is a Bilti Mitziyus Nimtza element, which we'll talk about more later. I don't want to go into much more detail right now, but that's what he adds now in this last line. And here's where I'll stop for today. We covered a pretty heavy piece, top of page 8, the Samach Vav. Are there any further questions? Any other questions?
So when the Rebbe says that we're Atzmus, or the
You asked me this many times. I think you need a mashpia or someone to teach you what that means. There's only what did you ever wonder, since Hashem Echad, how could we be Atzmus when there's only one God? How do you answer that question? I know it. I didn't
that we
mean
are
to
part
catch
of
you.
God, that we're a chelik of God.
Okay,
That
so
we're
that doesn't
chelik of
mean
the
we're
one
asas.
God.
But what does that mean, a chelik of God? What does it mean? Is God made up of parts?
No, that we're a chelik of the one God.
But
I
if
don't
it's
know what
one,
that means.
then if it's one, then it's one. If it's a chelik, it's not one. It's a piece. I mean, I'm wondering.
If Atzmus is everything, we are we are manifestations of Atzmus
Atzmus
because
is
everything.
everything, but not everything is Atzmus.
Oh, that's for sure.
So
Yeah, but just the notion that you are partaking of it by your mere existence, because everything partakes of Atzmus, because it wouldn't exist without Atzmus. Atzmus is everything. So in that sense, you partake of it. You want to mincing words here. Are you part of it? Are you partaking of it? I mean, these are nuances.
but to say everything, God is everything, doesn't mean everything is God. There's only one God, and God created an existence. And it's true, yes, every fiber of existence originates from God, but that doesn't make every fiber of existence God. You can say it has
Right.
godly features, it has godly personality, it has godly purpose, but it's very different. And then, of course, comes the biggest question. So then what's the difference between a mosquito and a neshama of a Jew?
Maybe what Elisha is saying is that we contain atzmitic qualities.
I don't know what she's saying. I know
I'm
the
not
word
saying
because
anything. I'm just saying, like from Das Elyon, it is true that it's all one. And that
what is there a question on the table?
Not really. Not really.
I
I was
have
just
quite.
wondering how to make peace with Atzmus because it's such a high level,
It's
and whether it
making peace
applies.
because I refer you to wherever you learn that sikha, you should sit down with somebody and ask these questions that I just asked. How could you say something is Atzmus when there's only one God? And if you want to say it's a chelik, how could you say divide God into parts? And finally, the third question: what's the difference then between a neshama, chelik elikam and mal mamish, and a stone? Is also a chelik of God. God also created a stone. So therefore it has a piece of God in it too. I'm just pointing questions that need explanation. When you have those explanations, you'll come to more of understanding. You want me to explain it? I don't want to explain it right now because it's not the discussion in Samach. Again, this is one of the categories that I say it's a good question, very good question. Let me make it clear. I want to validate. I'm not dismissing the question at all. It's an excellent question. But it needs explanation, and right here is not the context. So I would rather explain it as a separate discussion. That's
Thank
all
you.
I'm saying.
Okay.
Maybe and you probably are going to explain this last line of this parenthetical on Sunday or later, but Keats are like at least to place a question, a placeholder for you to answer later if you want. I'm having a hard time understanding why the Rebbe Rashab says, as an example of this, you can look at an example of Atzmus is by relating to Etzem Ha'Ohr.
That's not what
And
he said. That's not translated correctly what you just said. That's not what he meant. Dugma is not an example for it. It means that God embedded into Etzem Ha'Ohr a sampling or a taste of that. That's how I would translate. Maybe that's what you meant.
Yeah, that's what I meant.
Okay, fine.
But digging down into the core of it, or is an expression. So Etzem Ha'Ohr is like a ma'or.
I just explained it. I said, did you hear how I explained it now, just briefly before? I said that God imparted part of his Bilti Mitziyus Nimtza into the world of Mitziyus Nimtza in Etzem Ha'Ohr. That's what I said.
Yes, I understand that. And
you're asking me to explain what that means, or
no, I'm not. I don't. Forget the question. I don't think my question's illegitimate. If you don't understand it, let's skip it. But
what is the question? So what is the question?
Question: if how can God is beyond expression? We've talked about that too. God is expression. He's a lack of expression. He's Gulu and he's Helam. When you say that that part of this example, whatever language you want, so I don't get tied up in semantics, is Bechinas Etzem Ha'Ohr. When I think of Etzem Ha'Ohr, the core nature of Or, I think that Or is expression, and God is beyond expression. So I don't see how that exemplifies Atzmus.
That's not so that's why I think you should go back to how I explained it. I think I explained
I
it,
wrote it down. In the Mitziyus Nimtza of Or, there's a taste of the Bilti Mitziyus Nimtza.
but I explained
And
why.
Etzem Ha'Or,
No,
there's
but
a
I
sense of
explained why.
Atzmus.
I
I
said
took notes. I mamish
no,
wrote down
but
what you
you're
said.
missing the most important line. I
Okay.
said because Or is absolute bittul, so it becomes like a shliach shel adam k'moisei. So even though it's a shliach and it's not atzmus, but because of its bittul, it can carry an atzmisdik element
Yeah.
to it.
Here's my full note. Because God wanted us to be able to have some sense of Atzmus, he embedded this part of his personality of Bilti Mitziyus Nimtza into Or, because Or is so batal, it carries the Etzem. In the Mitziyus Nimtza Or, there's a taste of the Bilti Mitziyus Nimtza. In Etzem
you're
Ha'Or,
asking
there's a sense
how
of
it
Atzmus.
works?
I wrote every word down you said.
No, but I'm saying, so what's your question now? What's the question? How it works?
No, I understand Or to be an expression, and God is above expression. We spent weeks on this in Line Base.
Why can't the God beyond expression give into Or a part of that beyond expression into expression?
How can God give part of his beyond expression into expression itself? I don't know.
Yes, like
To me, that's a
expressing
paradoxical statement.
Okay, well, that's exactly the reality, that there is a paradox going on here.
Okay, well, Yesh Lomar is kind of hard to. If a Yesh
No,
Lomar is a paradox.
and by God, remember, God doesn't have paradoxes. Paradox is only for us. And finally, I said, most importantly, this is going to be discussed at length in the Maimer Vayelach and Ki'imcha Mokar Chaim later in Samach Vav, more detail. So here he's just giving us just a short one line, but I also added that this is going to be discussed at length there. And it's a long discussion, and it deserves a long discussion. So any question you have or anyone else has on this topic, I would say you'll see a lot more coming about it later in Samach Vav. The Rebbe Rashab, as I said in this first mimer, he's laying the groundwork, but this is going to be discussed at length, literally at length. Pages upon pages, understanding what the bittul is, understanding the paradox, understanding how we actually can fuse together a godly reality and our reality. That's ultimately where we're going. And the answer is going to be bittul. Bittul is the key for us to fuse opposites, including paradoxes. So
Thank you.
I would just wait. Later, this is going to be discussed pretty much at length. For the record, in Ayin Beis, we also discussed it. At different places, end of volume 2, middle of volume 3 as well. But Samach Vav is one of the central places where this is going to be discussed. Okay?
Yes, indeed.
Good. So we're on top of page 8.